Hi there, Tim Moynihan, your host for Frank Assessment, where underwriting is everything. My friends, I am delighted to have a new guest to the program. His name, Dana Darlington, our Vice President of Sales here at Broker Service Marketing Group. And Dana, it's great to have you here at Frank Assessment.
Hey Tim, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, Dana. Dana, when we were backstage prior to walking into our studios here at BSMG, you shared with me a few headaches you've been having in the cardiac world, and it's not infrequent. Share it with me.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's pretty frequent over the last couple of years. I've got to tell you, this atrial fibrillation seems to be coming up more and more. And, I'm curious if you could share with us, what is AFib and how does underwriting view it?
Great question, and a very vogue malady, by the way, Dana. I draw anybody listening today to watching television and noticing that 3 out of 5 pharmacological commercials are for atrial fib. Pradaxa, Eliquis, Xarelto, anticoagulants, Dana, if you will, to prevent the likelihood of a stroke in atrial fib. But atrial fib, defined, Dana, is an irregular heartbeat. It is caused by an array of electrical impulses produced in the upper chambers of the heart, which are firing sporadically, creating the irregular heartbeat. It's important, Dana, to recognize what an underwriter is looking for in atrial fib. We're looking for the age of diagnosis. Like to have it in the 50s, not in your 70s. I like to see it right in the 50s. I want to know the treatment, Dana. There is a myriad of treatment methodologies with atrial fib, and it's primarily based on the type of atrial fib you have. Paroxysmal, single episode, short duration episodes, chronic, persistent atrial fib. Those treatment methods can be nothing more than the anticoagulant therapies, I just referenced. They can include cardioversion, 2 ways: the electrical paddles to shock that heart back into normal sinus rhythm. You can do that medicinally also, usually with a drug called amiodarone. You can also treat it with ablations, radio frequency based ablations, in which you're utilizing a catheter, and at the tip you are freezing or burning, destroying the heart tissue, which is deemed the genesis of that arrhythmia. The key is how successful that treatment is, which will determine the underwriting pricing on the risk. So
the difference between proximal and chronic, what kind of pricing range are we looking at?
Great question, and an astute observation, my friend. Paroxysmal singles are beautiful. I love those. I am looking at standard almost all the time, Dana. Usually with single episodes or short duration episodes. By short duration, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about 4-5 episodes a year. And particularly under age 60 or even over age 60, we're looking at standard. Once we get to chronic, all day long, Dana, all day long. Once we get over 60 and we get chronic and we have persistent atrial fib, even with a cardioversion, even with an ablation, it's not always successful. We're looking at a rating. 2 tables, 3 tables, sometimes 4, but let's call it 3, Dana.
So that case we had last fall, you may remember, which was a pretty significant case, that was table rated, and that was a pretty significant AFib case, if you recall.
Unbelievable engagement and a very complicated one, and I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. Starts as an atrial fib case with a very sophisticated producer. Find out that below the atrial fib is a heart block. Below the heart block is an elevated calcium score, cardiac plaque. But got a little bit more complicated. When we're about to close the engagement, the client advises the producer and us together at the same time, he had a pacemaker put in 25 hours earlier. Not 24, 25. One might say, we're done here. We're going to move on to a declination. no dauber down here. The pacemaker actually produces a much more favorable outlook, both from a treatment regimen and a mortality outcome. We actually improved the assessment and delivered table 4 pricing 60 days after the pacemaker implantation, and we placed $17 million of coverage, Dana.
Yeah.
Great deal. You were a big player in that, my friend.
Yeah,
Outstanding.
Really amazing result there, Tim. And you know, I've seen you do this before, and this isn't a one-off. You know, you spoke to my colleague Mike Hopkins last week on this. How are you doing this?
Dana, my friend, if you remember the magic, the acronym is RDU, Risk Differentiation Underwriting. And if anybody out there listening today wants to know more about RDU, you need to call us. You need to call him. You need to call BSMG. And before I let you go, don't ever forget that the next episode of Frank Assessment is around the corner, where underwriting is everything.